That the graphics are going to come up and then. Hello again, this is Bill Lindemann with the Believers Business Center show. Carrie Sluter won't be able to make it tonight, but we have a really special guest tonight, really going to have an interesting show. He's Leo Doc Flory, and you were a combat medic, Leo, in the Vietnam War.
Yes.
And it should be very interesting. He's written a book called Transition to Duty. And, well, do you want to tell us? Well, I'm going to start by saying that you were in the 101st Airborne, and that is probably the most well-known company of and combat company in the whole military because of the Second World War, D-Day, because of the Band of Brothers TV series, and you were in this 101st Airborne in Vietnam, so it's a very, very storied group and very high tradition. So, Leo, what motivated you to write the book? I mean, obviously, not many people write books about their experiences, but what is it that motivated you?
Well, first of all, relative to the 101st Airborne Division, we had quite a reputation to try to uphold.
Yes, that's for sure. Yeah.
And I appreciate what you know about the 101st, that it is quite a famous unit, and I was quite surprised when I ended up with them. But the thing that motivated me to write this book was an email that I got from a Miss Jennifer Gaines. And I received this email because one of the men that I served with in Vietnam decided that he was going to try to put the company, B Company, second of the 501st, back together again. And he started his quest about 15 years ago. And he contacted me in 2002 for a reunion that was going to take place. And it was a shock to hear from him because it was also a guy who had been wounded and who I had patched up. And so he, pardon me just for a second. I should have thought about that in advance.
And I'll do the same. Yes.
He contacted me about this reunion, and I was so pleased to hear from him. The reunion is going to take place in 2003, which I attended, and by then he had a pretty fair website going. And you can find that at bc2501airborne.com.
Okay.
And we're all there, and there's pictures of the reunions and that sort of thing. Well, this Jennifer Gaines, in about 2009, surfed in on that website and found my name and the name of a few others and sent us letters regarding her uncle, Robert Milichik, who was killed in Vietnam, and she had went further to say that he was killed on a place called Firebase Airborne. And of course, when I read that, I alerted to it right away because I knew about Airborne, and I knew the Firebase was overrun, and many people were killed there. There was 20, I believe, 22 men killed and about 65 wounded when it was overrun by North Vietnamese regulars. I had been on that base about 4 days prior to that, and we did some reconnaissance there, and then we were flown by helicopter, and this all takes place in the Ashaw Valley, in and around.
Okay.
Firebase Airborne was on the east mountain ridge of the Ashaw. We were flown to the opposite side, to the west, and we were put down near the base of a fairly large hill called 937 at the time, and we were going on reconnaissance there. On the 4th day of that recon, we had been fortunate not to encounter any enemy, although we could tell that they were in the area. And they were in the area in a big way, but they had left us alone for whatever reason. About 3 o'clock in the morning on the 4th day, we were at a place low enough that we had a visual to Firebase Airborne, and all hell broke loose at that time. And the North Vietnamese used green tracers in their rifles, and the Americans used red tracers in their rifles, and we could see that exchange, the volleys of fire going on that fire base. And of course, our guts all go sour at the time because we know they were getting hit, and then the radio traffic started going crazy, and so we were all up and watching what was going on. And of course, that fight went on for quite a few hours, and there were a lot of explosions and bombs and that sort of thing going on, and pleas for help and that sort of thing. And there was simply nothing that we could do at the time to try to help out. It finally ended with an aircraft, a C-130, I think, that's mounted with miniguns, and they call it Spooky, and some call it Snoopy, and they can fire that thing at night and make circles around a fire base, and that finally repelled the enemy. Well, then at daybreak, we went down into the valley where we could cut an LZ, and were flown back onto that fire base again. And of course, it was chaos when we got there, and it was conditions were horrible, and we had to deal with the dead and that sort of thing, and then pull reconnaissance again around that area to look for any other enemy that might be there. So I knew a great deal about where Robert Milichik was killed, even though I didn't know him. He was with a sister company. He was with A Company, second of the 501st, and we were with B Company. So at that point, I had emailed Jennifer back, and those emails, those original emails, are in the book. I copied all that business, and told her that I didn't know him, but I knew a lot about it, and that I would do whatever I could to try to answer her questions. She wanted to know about him. She never met him.
I see.
And so she had a lot of questions. I was able to, through other friends and associates, get her direct contact with A Company, which through the next couple of years, she was able to make contact with men that did know him and that served directly with him. But meanwhile, that night, when I went home, I searched through information that I had, and the VFW magazine had a great article on Firebase Airborne when it was overrun, and I collected that up, and any names or information that I could find, and I began to write notes about where we were in the story that I just described, but I wanted to put it in more detail, you know. And I did, and I did quite a bit of writing about it, but I ended up somewhat befuddled about how to deal with that information and how to present it to her, and I remembered an English teacher that I had back in high school. Her name was Miss Holland. And I remember her saying that if you're going to write a letter or a book or anything else, it has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I had part of the middle. And so I ended up and decided that I had to start at the real beginning. And that was about myself in high school, indicator in a small town, not knowing anything about the war, really. And growing up a few years and hearing about it on the news, and then Clarence Gibson, a black man that I ran track with, had joined the service, and he was a year ahead of me in high school. He had joined the service and ended up and was killed there. And the whole business of Vietnam became different to me after that. And I began to pay more attention. Well, then, when I got out of high school, I got my Class 1 rating, as well as every other male student in Decatur High School at the time, as Class 1, ready for the draft. I was drafted before the year was out. That would have been 1967. And then I had a temporary deferment that put my service time off until February of 1968, when I did join the service. And by August of 1968, I was on my way to Vietnam. And I spent a full year there, 365 days, right to the day. I managed to survive. I was with an infantry company the entire time. I thought after medical training, which was my MOS, as a 91B20, which would be a equivalent to a ward corpsman, or could be a combat medic. I thought perhaps I might go to a MASH unit or something over there, but I was conscripted right away to the 101st, and it was actually kind of funny when I was at the airport there in Benoit, which was pretty crude to what you might see anywhere here. And they had a huge metal canopy that the guys would get off the airplanes and go under this canopy with their gear and weight assignments, and around the perimeter of that canopy were names and symbols for different units, and it could be Navy, it could be Air Force, Army, Marines, whoever happened to come into that area, and they would call your name and ask you to report to that unit. And of course, they asked Leo Flory to go to the 101st Airborne Division. And I thought, well, they really had probably made a mistake because I wasn't jump qualified. And even though I hadn't been in the service all that long, like you, I was really quite aware of what the 101st was by then, and they were quite an elite unit. So I sat in my seat and I waited. And about a half hour later, my name was called again to report to the 101st. And I thought, well, maybe I better just go tell these boys what for, that they'd made a mistake. And so I took my bag and baggage, and I went there, and I told them. Well, they told me what for. And that I had been conscripted by the 101st, and I was to get on that deuce and a half that was parked just behind their hooch, and go up to the battalion rear, which I did. And I went through training after that. They had 1 week of what they called P training, and I have no clue what that means, but it was extremely rigorous. It was the best military training I had, I think, and most of it was done by men who were wounded, some of them still recovering from their wounds, and they brought them down there as trainers
Okay.
for the new people that were going up. And
Mm-hmm.
they did an extremely good job of
Mm-hmm.
prepping us for what was to come. And I'm really glad I had that. That part of that training was more medical shots and that sort of thing, and how to deal with the people, the natives, and how we were to act and that sort of thing. It was excellent training.
Leo, what is it that motivated you to get into a medical area?
Well, it's in the book.
Okay. All right.
It was a twist of fate, you might say, that put me there.
Okay.
I could have gone into engineers, but I had ignored an order,
Okay.
and it was the wrong order to ignore.
Okay.
And so I was placed where a captain wanted me to be placed.
Okay.
And I think it was one of those things that turned out right in the end. Even as a medic, we did carry weapons. I carried an M16.
Okay.
We were trained on that
All right.
during
Sure.
P training also, and qualified
Right.
with it there in country.
Mm-hmm.
My weapons number was 704097X.
Okay.
I remember it yet today.
Sure.
I carried it for that full year and lived
Yeah.
with it.
Sure.
But yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
how there's more explanation to that
Okay.
in the book. And
As a combat medic, I suppose you see things that, are just beyond words as far as wounds and things. I suppose you mentioned that in the book and talk about that.
yeah, I try. I tried to reflect on those things in the
Yeah,
book, and
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Being with an infantry company, especially an elite infantry company,
Right. Yeah.
who tries to do their job aggressively,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess I could add that the job of infantry
Mm-hmm.
in the military is fairly simple.
Mm-hmm.
Your job is to go out and find the enemy, seek them out, find them, kill them,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
or capture them if you can.
Mm-hmm.
Either take or destroy his stuff.
Okay.
And it may seem gruesome enough, but
Yeah.
that's literally how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And the 101st was pretty determined
Mm-hmm.
to do that,
Yes.
and we did.
Uh-huh.
In the book, when I got to a point where I realized that I was writing a book,
Mm-hmm.
and that was after about 400 pages of yellow line paper,
Sure. Sure.
hand printed,
Yeah. Yeah.
with scribble lines and arrows,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
additions and deletions.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I got to that point, I decided that I wanted to write something that family members could tolerate.
Okay.
I wanted
Yes.
wives and maybe children of veterans to be able to read it, and I have grandchildren,
Sure.
and I want them to be able to read it.
Yeah.
They're a bit young yet,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
but they will.
Mm-hmm.
They'll know what their grandfather had to do.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
So it is something that a family member can read, but the comments that I've gotten from the veterans that have read it, and it really hasn't mattered much what job they did, they can relate to it. There's something in there that they can relate to,
Sure.
and it's for infantrymen, regardless of who they were with,
Mm-hmm.
relate to it. I've met a lot of artillerymen,
Mm-hmm.
and there's one of those twists of fate that there's a photo in there that was taken of me probably in July or August of '69, when I finally became permanent party after 10 months out in the field, back at Camp Sally, where I went to in the first place.
Yes.
Camp Sally was about 15 miles north of the city away. I had nice new fatigues, and I went out taking a few pictures, and they had some 8-inch track howitzers that were placed around the perimeter at Camp Sally. And I sat on the front of one of those howitzers, and I sat there with my fingers in my ears looking at the cannon barrel, and as if it were going to go off. And of course you couldn't do that, I wouldn't have survived, but made a great photo.
Yeah.
And I was at the Kokomo reunion in Kokomo, Indiana.
Okay.
There's a bunch of veterans that put on just a huge event down there every year. And I went to it last year for the first time, and a friend of mine and I, David Reinheimer, who the book is dedicated to.
Okay.
And David's also the guy who put B Company back together by researching names and phone numbers, and just, he's still at it. He's still relentless about trying to get a hold of everybody.
Sure.
And he's managed about 500 so far. Dave and I went to work and went door to door, camp to camp, because it's all campers and campers there. And it was the third day, and we were about finished, and I ran into some guys who were 101st, and they were in artillery. And I talked to these guys for a while, and I ended up thumbing through the book and showed them that picture of that howitzer. And it had a particular name that I won't mention here on TV.
All right.
And that he looked at it and he says, "Oh, that's a kicker." He says, "That's our gun." And he was quite surprised. I was quite surprised. And he looked at the serial numbers and he says, "Yeah." He says, that was part of our unit, and that was one of our guns. So I sold 4 books right there, right away. And I've been in contact with them since, and there are great stories about that gun.
I'd be willing to bet that the fact that you wrote the book is one of the most rewarding things you've ever done, and the response of people. I can imagine a lot of the people that were in Vietnam probably told you, I experienced that. You brought back memories. Do you get a lot of that?
Yes. I've had multiple times that people will contact me, and I love that part about it. I've been able to meet people that I could never have met were it not for writing that book. But they'll contact me and say, "I swear that you were just writing the story about me."
Yeah.
And what they did, and
boy, that must be satisfying.
Oh, it has been. It's been a great journey. It's just taken me places that, including this tonight. It wouldn't have happened. And it has been gratifying and healing. It is a book that heals. I have found too, and surprises people. I get a lot of comments from women who read it, and that they understand their husbands better.
Oh, that's good.
Or their brother, or their father better. And they want to tell me about it. And they have, and I can't tell you how gratifying that is.
That's one of those unintentional benefits. You don't realize that it has benefits that you never even thought of. That here are women who have grown up or lived with or married to men that were in the service, and that when they read your book, they understand for the first time what they went through. And well, that's wonderful.
I've had World War II veterans that have read it and have commented that they felt that they couldn't have done what we had to do. And I still look up to those guys in a way even greater than what we did with the bravery that those men showed during the battles they did.
Mm-hmm.
The difference was that they were definitive battles.
Yes.
And an average infantryman in World War II might see 40 days
Mm-hmm.
of contact with the enemy. And
Mm-hmm.
Statistics have shown that the average Vietnam veteran would see 240 days, and that you weren't safe anywhere. It's like Iraq and Afghanistan both. Those men are never safe anywhere. It doesn't matter what your job is. You don't have to be infantry.
Mm-hmm.
You're still not.
You know, that's interesting. What you're telling me is that this is largely an untold story of what you guys went through. I mean, it's what you're telling me now. I never realized how intense your experience was. If the World War II veterans were that impressed with what you had to go through, that's telling me a lot. And that you know, had no relief, had long tours of duty. That's an eye-opener. And I think, you know, it was so contentious at the time. Some people honored you, and some people, you know, put you down. And that must have been a very heavy load for a lot of people.
It was, that's a really good point, Bill.
Yeah.
We faced a lot of rejection
Right.
when we got back.
Yeah.
And it was, the rejection was real, even by World War II veterans at the time, and Korean veterans who ran the VFW post and the American Legion post. And it caused spin-offs. VVA, Vietnam Veterans of America, was formed for that reason, because guys didn't feel comfortable at the VFWs. In Decatur, it was a different story. There was a guy named Bruno Dragon that
It's quite a name.
was the guy who really saw to it that the post got built, and he just wouldn't allow that to happen in his post.
Good.
And then being a small town too, I think that helped a lot. We all knew one another, and I had comments from a few, but for the most part, I was welcomed back fairly well in Decatur. But I think it's just part of the town, you know. That's the way they are. It's the way it is. And so I didn't have to face that like some of them did. I was fortunate when I came back through San Francisco that we arrived late, and I taxied to the airport late at night, and the hippies weren't there. And we were told to avoid them. And I didn't have to have that experience either, but they knew about them, and they were there during the day.
Well, we're about to wind up the show, and Leo, what you've told me tonight tells me that it's still an untold story, and I think you've got another book or two in you.
I hope
a lot
I
of
do.
people need to know about this, how much you guys went through. I think you did a fantastic job. Your book is called Transition to Duty.
Yes.
And you were a combat medic in Vietnam attached to the 101st Airborne, which is the most storied unit in all the armed forces. So I encourage everyone to go and buy the book, and I think it's needed. It's a healing book.
It's a true. It's all true. They're not heroes in there, aside from those that didn't make it back. It's just the raw facts of what life was really like.
Okay.
You can contact me through our website, Flory, Flory, Enterprise, ENTERPRISE.com.
Okay.
And there's PayPal on there, and telephone number and whatever. Love to talk to people.
Good. Wonderful. Well, we'll be looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
All right. You're welcome, Leo.